It is normal for all parties to die. Glad that I'm still alive. Lucky to see me alive. Klein shuddered and took 2 quick steps toward the door. He tried to catch up with the police officers and seek protection. Just as his hand touched the handle, his actions stopped abruptly. If the police officer made it sound so terrible, why don't they protect me? After all, I am an important witness and crucial clue. Is this negligence? Or is this a bait? All kinds of possibilities came up in Klein's mind, causing him to suspect that the police were still secretly watching him and observing his reactions. With such a thought, he became much calmer and was no longer panic-stricken. He slowly opened the door and shouted down the stairway with a deliberate shiver. You will protect me, right? Pa pa pa. The police officers did not respond and there was no change in the rhythm of the sounds between the leather shoes and the wooden staircase. I know. You will. Klein shouted again, trying to convince himself that he just a normal person who had met with danger. The sounds of the footsteps faded and disappeared from the apartment. Klein grunted and laughed in his mind. Your reaction is too fake. The acting is not qualified. He did not chase. Instead, he turned back to the room and closed the door. In the next few hours, Klein fully demonstrated perturbation, restlessness, and anxiety. He did not relax because of the absence of people around him. This is called an actor prepares. In his heart, he chuckled. As the sun tilted west, it turned the clouds fiery red. The apartment occupants came home one after another. Finally, Klein shifted his focus to other places. It is about time for Melissa to finish her classes. He turned his attention back to the stove. In one quick swoop, he lifted the kettle, stripped off the coal and took out the revolver. Without pausing nor delay, he reached out to the back of the lower plank of the bed, where 10 wooden poles crisscrossed to support the mattress. After inserting the revolver between a wooden pole and a plank, Klein straightened up his body and waited uneasily. He feared that the police would suddenly knock open the door and rush into the room with firearms in their hands. If it was an ordinary world of the steam era, no one would be able to know what he had just done. However, this was a world of extraordinary powers and he had just verified their existence. After a few minutes, there were still no movements at the door. He could only hear the conversation of 2 tenants agreeing to go to the Wild Hearts bar at Iron Cross Street. Klein breathed a sigh of relief and found composure in his mind. I will wait for Melissa to come back and stew mutton with tender peas. As soon as the thought appeared, Klein's mouth seemed to be overflowing with the scent of gravy. It also reminded him of how Melissa stewed mutton with tender peas. She would whip the meat in boiled water, then stewed it with onions, salt, a little pepper, and water. After some time, the peas and potatoes would be added, and everything would be stewed for another 40 to 50 minutes. This is a really simple and crude method. It solely depends on the taste of the meat itself. Klein couldn't help but shook his head. However, how could peasants have access to a variety of spices, or pursue diversity in cooking methods? They could only choose what was simple, practical and economical. As long as the meat was not burnt nor spoiled, it was good enough for someone who could only afford meat once or twice a week. Klein was not a chef. While he had used to eat out often, he had also cooked 3 or 4 meals a week. Over the time, he had developed some level of culinary skill. At least, he felt that he would not make a disappointing dish out of the pound of mutton. By the time Melissa comes back, it will be after 7:30. She will be starving. It's time for her to witness the real culinary skills. Klein gave himself an excuse. He rekindled the fire in the stove and started washing the slab of mutton in the public washroom. Then, he took out the chopping board, the knife and started slicing the mutton into small pieces. As for how to explain his suddenly acquired cooking skills, he decided to push it to his dead friend, Welch McGovern. The classmate of his had not only employed a chef who specialized in intersea cuisines but also enjoyed cooking himself. He had invited Klein to try his dishes a few times in the past. Well, the dead cannot expose my lie. Actually, this is a world with extraordinary powers. The dead may really be able to speak. As he thought of this, Klein was a little unconfident. He swept the idea aside and put the meat into the soup bowl. Then, he took out the seasoning box and threw a spoonful of yellowish coarse salt. In addition, he took out a bottle of precious black pepper and mixed it together with the mutton and salt to make a basic marination. Klein placed the saucepan on the stove. As he waited for it to heat up, he took out the leftover carrots from the day before and together with the onions he bought on the day itself, he cut them into many pieces. After the preparation, he took out a small jar from the kitchen closet and opened it. There was some lard left in the jar. Klein took a spoonful, placed it in the pan to melt it. After that, he poured the cubes of carrots and onions into the pan and stir-fried them for a while. The scent began to permeate. Klein put in all the mutton and carefully cooked them for a while. In such a procedure, it was actually essential to use cooking wine or at least red wine. However, there was no such extravagance in the Moretti family. Even Benson could only drink 1 cup of beer every week. Klein had to do with what he had, so he just added in a little water. After stewing for about 20 minutes, he opened the lid, added the green peas and cut potatoes, as well as a cup of hot water, and 2 spoonfuls of salt. Then, he closed the lid and lowered the fire to maintain a simmer. Klein exhaled a breath of satisfaction and patiently waited for his sister to return. The time passed slowly, and the aroma in the room became more intense. There was the temptation of meat, the mellowness of the potatoes, and the freshness of the onion. The scents gradually mixed. Klein had to swallow his saliva from time to time. So he took out the pocket watch and read the time again. More than 40 minutes later, brisk but rhythmic footsteps approached the door. A key was inserted, the handle turned, and the door opened. "Smell great." Melissa had not entered, but she whispered suspiciously. As she carried her bag and stepped in the room, her eyes swept over the stove. "Did you try to cook?" Melissa took off her cap. With her hands pausing in mid-air, she looked horrified. She sniffed again, and after inhaling more aroma, her eyes quickly softened. She seemed to have found some assurance. "Did you try to cook?" she questioned again. "Are you afraid that I am wasting the mutton?" Klein asked with a smile. Without waiting for a response, he continued, "Rest assured, I have specially asked Welch what to do with this dish. As you know, he has a good chef. Is this your first time cooking?" Melissa's brows wrinkled subconsciously, but it was then smoothened by the scent. "I think I'm very talented in this area," Klein laughed. "It's almost ready. You can put down your things and wash your hands in the washroom. After that, you can have a try. I have confidence in my culinary skills." Listening to her brother's orderly arrangement and looking at his gentle and calm smile, Melissa paused at the doorway and she looked a little surprised. "Do you prefer the mutton be stewed a little longer?" Klein joked with a laugh. "Ah, all right." Melissa regained her thoughts. With the cap in one hand and the bag in another, she quickly walked into her room. When the lid of the saucepan was opened, Klein's eyes became misty with water vapor. 2 rye pieces of bread had been placed on the sides of stew, allowing them to absorb the fragrance and become soft. When Melissa finished packing her belongings, washing her hands and face, she saw a plate of stew mutton with tender peas, potatoes, carrots, and onions on the table. There were also 2 pieces of dark rye bread with a little gravy. "Come on, have a try." Klein pointed to the wooden fork and spoon that he had laid on the side of the plate. Melissa was still a little confused, so she did not refuse. She picked up the fork, pierced a piece of potato, put to her lips and took a bite. The fragrance of potatoes and gravy expanded at the same time, causing her saliva to be secreted madly. She swallowed the potato in 2 bites. "Try the meat too." Klein motioned at the plate with his chin. He had tasted the dish just now and felt that he could barely get a passing grade, but it was more than enough for a little girl who had not been to restaurants and could only occasionally taste meat. Melissa's eyes brightened with anticipation and she carefully forked a piece of mutton. It was stewed thoroughly and the meat was so tender that it was melting. The juice of the meat exploded, filling the mouth with the wonderful flavor. It was such an unprecedented feeling that Melissa could not stop eating. When she came back to her senses, she had already finished several pieces of mutton. Klein, this is for you." Melissa's face flushed and she stuttered. "I have already sneaked a few bites." "That's the privilege of a chef." Klein smiled and comforted her sister. He also took the fork and spoon, ate some of the meat, together with the peas and bread. Melissa relaxed as she was influenced by Klein's calm behavior. She then re-immersed into the delicacy. "It's so appetizing. I simply can't imagine that it's the first time you cook." Melissa glanced at the empty plate on the table and praised. "Compared with Welch's chef, there is still a long way to go. When I'm rich, I'll take you and Benson to the restaurants and we can try something better," Klein said with some anticipation in his heart. "Your interview preparation." Melissa didn't finish and suddenly made a satisfied sign. She hurriedly used her hand to cover her mouth and looked embarrassed. "It is because the stewed mutton with tender peas is just so delicious." Klein smiled and decided not to laugh at his sister. He pointed to the empty plates. "This is your task." "Okay." Melissa hurriedly stood up. She took the plates and rushed out of the door. When she returned, she opened the cupboard and habitually checked the items such as the seasoning box. "You have used those?" Melissa was surprised and blurted. She turned to look at Klein, holding a black pepper bottle and a lard jar in her hand. Klein spread his hands and smiled. "Just a little bit, but this is the price for delicious food." Melissa's eyes sparkled for a moment, she changed her expressions for a few times before eventually biting her lips. "Let me cook next time." You should make good use of the time to prepare for your interview and think about work." "Melissa, can you stop bringing this up?" Klein secretly muttered. He felt as if his headaches were coming back again. The amount of forgotten knowledge was not too much, but it was not little either. The interview would take place on the day after tomorrow. How could there be sufficient time for him to revise? Additionally, he was also involved in a strange and terrible incident. How could he have the mood to study? After giving a perfunctory response to his sister, Klein began to pretend reading a book. Melissa moved a chair to the table and sat next to him. She was using the gas light to complete her homework. The atmosphere was quiet and peaceful. At about 11 o'clock, the brother and sister bade each other good nights and went to their individual bed. Done. 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 A series of knocks woke Klein up from his dreams. He glanced at the bright morning light outside the window and sat up in a dazed state. Who is it? What time is this? Why didn't Melissa wake me up? It's me, Dunn Smith. There was a calm male voice outside the door. Dunn Smith? I don't know who is that. Klein shook his head and got out of bed. He dragged his feet towards the door. As he opened the door, he saw the gray pupil police officer from yesterday. What happened? Klein asked vigilantly. The gray pupil officer replied with a solemn expression. We found a coachman who confirmed that you had been to Mr. McGovern's residence on the 27th, the day of Mr. McGovern's and Ms. Naya's deaths. Mr. McGovern had also paid for your coach fare. Klein froze for a moment, without the fear or guilt of being exposed. It was because he was not lying at all. In fact, he felt that the evidence provided by the police officer Dunn Smith was not really unexpected. So on June 27th, the original self went to Welch's residence. On the night of his return, he committed suicide, exactly like Welch and Naya. Klein opened his mouth and forced a smile. This is not enough evidence to prove that I am directly related to the death of Welch and Naya. To be honest, I also want to know what had happened and figure out what my two poor friends encountered. However, I really can't remember anything. I have almost completely forgotten what I had done on the 27th. You may not believe it, but I have to rely on my own notes to guess that I might have been to Welch's house on the 27th. You are very calm. The gray pupil police officer Dunn Smith did not show any signs of frustration and nodded with a smile. You should be able to sense my sincerity. Klein looked directly at the other person's eyes. All that I have said are true. Of course, they are just part of the truth. Dunn Smith did not respond immediately, he swept his eyes across the room before he continued slowly. Mr. McGovern had lost a revolver. I suppose I should be able to find it here. Right, Mr. Moretti? Sure enough. Klein finally figured out the origin of the revolver, and with thoughts spinning through his mind he quickly made a decision. He raised his hands halfway in the air, stepped back, and motioned his chin towards the bed. It is at the back of the bed. He didn't specifically say the lower bed, because normal people wouldn't hide anything on the back of the upper bed, as it would allow visitors to see it at a glance. The gray pupil police officer Dunn did not move forward. Anything else to add? Klein replied without hesitation. Yes. I woke up in the middle of the night yesterday. I found myself lying on my desk, next to a revolver, and there was a bullet shell on the ground beside the wall. It seemed that I was committing a suicide. Perhaps I had no experience, especially on using a pistol, or I was too scared to do it. In short, the bullet did not achieve the desired effect, my head was still intact, and I am still living. Since then, I have forgotten some memories, including what I did or saw at the Wake's place on the 27th. I am not lying because I really don't remember it. In order to wash away the suspicions and resolve his own bizarre encounter, Klein had almost said everything, except his crossing over and the mysterious meeting. In addition, he deliberately phrased his words so that they could stand the test. For example, he did not say that the bullet did not hit his head, only to describe that it did not achieve the desired effect and that his head was still intact. In the another person's ears, the two seemed to express the same meaning, but in reality, they were completely different. The gray pupil police officer Dunn listened quietly and spoke slowly. This is very much in line with my expectation and the hidden logic of similar incidents. Of course, I don't know how you managed to survive. Thanks for believing in me. I also don't know how did I survive the incident. Klein was slightly relieved. But, done through a twist, whether I believe in you is not important. Now that you have a high degree of suspicion, you must be confirmed by an expert, that you have really forgotten the encounter, or that you didn't directly cause the death of Mr. McGovern and Ms. Naya. He coughed and showed a serious expression. Mr. Moridi, please cooperate with the investigation and return to the police station with us. It will take 2 to 3 days if you do not have any problems. Has the expert arrived? Klein asked. Didn't you mention 2 days' time? She was earlier than our expectation. Dunn moved sideways and motioned for Klein to come out. Can I leave a note? Klein asked. Benson was still on a business trip and Melissa went to school. He could only leave a message telling them that he was involved in Welch's case so that they would not worry about his absence. Dunn nodded. Sure. When Klein returned to his desk, he began to look for paper and craft his next step. To be honest, he did not want to see the expert. After all, he had a bigger secret. In a world with the 7 churches, under the premise that the predecessor, Russell, was met with assassination, transmigration was probably something that might be dealt with seriously by the tribunal departments. However, he was not a match for a professional police officer as he had no weapons, no fighting skills, nor any extraordinary abilities. Not to mention the fact that there were several of Dunn's subordinates standing in the shadows outside the door. If they fired a volley, he would be done for. Let me take one step at a time and see how it goes. Klein left a note, took the key and followed Dunn out of the room. In the dark corridor, there were 4 police officers in black uniform and white strips standing on both sides, and they looked very alert. Klein followed Dunn and stepped down the wooden staircase. As he walked down the staircase, he could hear the creaking of the wooden steps. There was a 4-wheeled single-horse carriage waiting outside the apartment. The side of the carriage was marked with a double sword across Royal Crown police sign. The surrounding was as busy and crowded as every morning. "Come on." Dunn motioned Klein to get up the carriage. Klein was just about to take a step. Suddenly, a hawker selling oysters seized a customer and accused him of being a thief. As the two sides scuffled and rioted, the horses were startled, and the surroundings immediately became filled with confusion. An opportunity. Klein couldn't bother to think much about it. He leaned forward and dashed into the crowd. Shoving, dodging, and pushing, he ran wildly, towards the other side of the street. Under the current circumstances, in order to avoid meeting the expert, he could go to the dock outside the city and take a ship downstream the Tusok River and flee to the capital, Beckland. The population there was large enough for him to hide easily. Of course, it was also possible to board a steam train, head east to the nearest port of Empat, take the sea route to Pritz, and then to Beckland. After a while, Klein ran out of the street outside his apartment and turned into Iron Cross Street. There were several hireable carriages being parked at the junction. To the pier outside the city. Klein used his hands as support and jumped onto one of them. His plan was very clear. He wanted to deliberately mislead the chasing police. Therefore, he would wait until the carriage moved a certain distance before jumping out of it. Okay. The coachman pulled the reins. The carriage left Iron Cross Street. Just as Klein was preparing to jump, he suddenly found the carriage had turned into another road, not the road leading to the exit of the city. "Where are you going?" Klein paused and asked with concern. "To Welch's residence," the coachman answered in a cold voice. "What?" Klein was shocked. Then, the coachman turned his head to reveal a pair of dark gray eyes. It was Dunn Smith. "You!" Klein panicked. He felt the whole world started spinning, and suddenly he sat up. "Sit up." Klein glanced left and right, looking puzzled. He noticed that the red moon was glowing outside the windows and the room was covered with crimson filament. He reached out and touched his forehead. It was wet and cold, full of cold sweat. The same was the feeling on his back. A nightmare, Klein gasped slowly. Fortunately, he felt quite awake in his dreams and could also think calmly. It was a rather strange experience. After a slight relaxation, Klein took a look at the pocket watch and found that it was only 2 o'clock in the early morning. He quietly got out of bed and intended to wash his face in the public washroom and resolve the issue of a bloated abdomen. He opened the door and walked down the dimly lit passage. Under the faint moonlight, he moved in soft footsteps towards the public toilet. Suddenly, he saw a silhouette standing in front of the window at the end of the corridor. The figure was dressed in a black windbreaker that was shorter than a robe but longer than a suit. The figure was half immersed in the darkness, bathed in the cold and bright crimson moonlight. The figure slowly turned around, his eyes deep, gray, and cold. Dunn Smith. Klein subconsciously took a step back. For a moment, he could not distinguish if he was awake or still in a dream. The figure took off his black hat, bowed slightly, smiled and spoke in a low voice. "Allow me to reintroduce myself. Night Watcher, Dunn Smith." Night Watcher. The team of extraordinaries mentioned by Justice and the hanged man that was under the goddess of the night. Klein began to understand the situation. He recalled what had happened just now and asked curiously. "You can control dreams? Did you fabricate the dream just now?" The Night Watcher, Dunn Smith, put on the black hat again. It covered his slightly high hairline, and his dark, gray eyes showed a concealed smile. "No, I have only entered your dreams and make the necessary guidance. His voice was mellow and soft as he spoke in the corridor of darkness and gloom. It was as if he didn't want to disturb the other people's sweet dreams. In dreams, although the normally repressed emotions and hidden mentalities are magnified, thus appearing to be confusing, ridiculous and crazy. However, the truths still exist and remain hidden beneath the surface. For an experienced person like me, everything is obvious and easy to notice. Therefore, in comparison to an awake person, I would rather believe the you in the dreams. How can normal people control their dreams? If I had dreamed of something on the earth, wouldn't it be discovered by Dunn Smith? Klein was surprised and full of after fear for the encounter in his dream. But he soon realized something strange. He remembered that he was very clear-headed and sensible in his dreams. It was as if he knew exactly what to say and what not to say. In simple terms, it is not like dreaming at all. Therefore, Dunn Smith only saw what I want him to see. Klein's thoughts raced through his head, and then he had a sudden insight on the situation. Is this the benefit that comes with transmigration? For example, I may have a different soul compared to others. Or perhaps it is the additional influence of the luck conversion ritual. So, Mr. Smith, are you convinced now that I have really lost my memory? Klein organized his words and asked cautiously. Dunn Smith did not answer directly but instead gave him a thoughtful look. Are you not surprised by this kind of encounter? The people whom I had met before refused to believe that there were extraordinary powers. Even when they were awake, they would insist that they were still dreaming. Klein gave an Maybe it's because I have been praying and hoping that such a power will come to assist me. It's very interesting logic. Maybe the reason that you have survived is not solely because of luck. Dunn nodded with a smile. I can confirm that you have really lost some memories because of this incident, especially the memories regarding the event itself. In this case, I can go back. Klein heaved a sigh of relief and queried. Dunn inserted one hand into his pocket and paced slowly towards Klein. The surrounding ambience became quiet and gentle. No, you still have to come with me to see the expert. He replied politely with a smile. Why? Klein blurted out. He added hastily, don't you believe in your ability to read dreams? Are you joking? If the expert is good at hypnosis, reading minds or similar abilities, then wouldn't my biggest secret be exposed? The result will be atrocious. I may be modest, but I do have confidence in my understanding of dreams, Dunn replied in composure. However, it's not a bad thing to verify something important again. What's more, her expertise is in a different field from me. She may be able to help you restore your memories to a certain extent. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he continued in a low voice. After all, you are the primary clue to locating the whereabouts of Antigonus family's notebook. What? Klein was confused. Dunn stopped in front of him, his gray pupils stared into Klein's eyes. We could not find the fourth epoch notebook on the site. We had searched the whole house thoroughly but we still couldn't find it. Welch is dead. Naya is dead. And you are the only clue left. Well. Klein was silent for a moment and took a deep breath. The notebook has gone missing. This is so unexpected. I haven't even thought about the whereabouts of the fourth epoch notebook. Dunn nodded slightly. He walked past Klein and continued speaking. You can lock the door and follow me to Welch's residence. The expert is waiting for us there. Silently taking a breath, Klein's heart pounded uneasily. He had wanted to refuse or even run away. However, he believed that Dunn Smith, with the simulation of the dream, would definitely have raised his alert. Given the gap between a normal person and an extraordinary, it would not be possible for him to escape. There must be a gun on him, and he is probably someone who has practiced shooting many times before. With all kinds of thoughts speeding through a heavy mind, Klein finally chose to accept the reality. Okay. For now, I can only take one step at a time. Maybe the special experience in my dreams will work again, let's go. Dunn's tone didn't waver. Klein turned and followed 2 steps. He then stopped abruptly. Mr. Smith, I want to go to the toilet first. After all, I came out with the intention to go to the toilet. Dunn did not stop him. Instead, he threw a meaningful glance at Klein. No problem, Klein. Believe me, in the night I'm far more powerful than you can imagine. In the night, Klein silently repeated these words. He did not make any recklessly attempts anymore. After he honestly solved the bulge of the lower abdomen, he washed his face with cold water to cool himself down completely. After changing his clothes and closing his door, Klein followed Dunn down the stairs in gentle footsteps. They walked to the exit of the apartment. Amidst the calmness, Dunn Smith suddenly questioned. At the end of the dream, why did you want to escape? What were you afraid of? Klein's thoughts raced quickly and he answered. I don't remember what I did at Welch's place. I don't remember if I was the one who caused him and Naya to die directly. I'm afraid that it would be found out to be related to me. I wouldn't want to take a gamble. It's better to run away to the southern continent and start a new life. If it were me, I would have done the same. Dunn pushed open the apartment door. The cool breeze in the middle of the night blew away the heat in the house. He was not worried about Klein's possible escape and stepped into carriage first. It was the same carriage that Klein saw in his dreams. The 4-wheeled, single-horse, chauffeur carriage was painted with a double sword across royal crown police symbol. Klein followed Dunn and noticed that there was a thick carpet on the floor of the carriage. The whole place was filled with aromas of tranquility. As he took a seat, he tried to find a topic and probe more into the case. Mr. Smith, let's say if the expert proves that I have really forgotten about the incident and that I am a victim, not a criminal, will the matter be over? In theory, yes. We will try to locate the notebook from other sources. As long as it exists, it can be discovered. Of course, before that, we will need to confirm that there are no curses left on you, no marks of evil spirits, and no corresponding psychological problems. With that, you can peacefully and healthily welcome the future of your life. Dunn Smith showed a smile. It was a rather queer smile. Klein keenly observed this. He could not relax and quickly followed up. In theory? Yes, it's just theoretical. In this field, there are always things that are distorted, contrary to common sense, and unbelievable. Dunn looked at Klein's eyes. Sometimes, we just cannot foresee the beginnings or the ends of the incidents. For example. Klein was a little shaken. On an almost empty street, the carriage drove quickly. Dunn took out his pipe and sniffed it deeply. When we thought that things were over and everything had returned to normal, it would come back in a more frightening and abnormal way. A few years ago, we handled a case of a cult. They organized the believers to commit suicide as sacrifices to please evil gods. One of the believers was selected, but his survival instincts overcame the stupidity, the foolish beliefs, and the hallucinatory drugs. He secretly ran to the police station to report the case. The matter was handed over to us. It was a very small task because the cult had no extraordinaries. The evil gods that they worshipped were simply made up by the leaders as a mean to extort money and enjoy. It was a disgrace to human nature. We just sent 2 members. Together with the cooperation of the police, we successfully resolved the case. Not a single cult member escaped. As for the whistleblower, we had also confirmed that he did not have the marks of evil spirits, curses, psychological damages, nor any personality problems. There were no strange signs at all. After that, he had a great career progression. He married a very good wife and she gave birth to a boy and a girl. The shadows of the incident seemed to have left him. The horrors and blood of past appeared to have completely dissipated. Here, Dunn Smith laughed and smiled. But in the March of this year, despite a great financial situation, a happy marriage, and good-looking kids, he died. He strangled himself to death in his office. The bright crimson moonlight outside the wagon window shone onto Dunn Smith. At this moment, his seemingly self-deprecating smile made Klein shudder. Strangled himself to death, Klein silently breathed in. He could almost imagine his own miserable ending. Even if you escaped, you have only escaped it temporarily. Is there any way to solve it permanently? Perhaps, by becoming an extraordinary. The carriage fell silent, and countless thoughts raced through Klein's mind. In this indescribable silence, the carriage traveled for a long time. It moved swiftly down the roads of Tengen. Just as Klein made up his mind to try and beg Dunn Smith for advice, the carriage stopped. "Mr. Smith, we have arrived at Mr. McGovern's house." The coachman's voice passed into both persons' ears. "Let's go down." Dunn tidied his knee-long windbreaker. "By the way, let me introduce the expert in advance. Her cover identity is the most famous soul whisperer in the Awa County." Klein calmed his thoughts and asked with curiosity. "What about her actual identity?" Dunn half turned his body and his head. His eyes were deep and gray. "A real soul whisperer. TN, slight adjustments to previous terms. Old, Awa Province, Intersi Province. New, Awa County, Intersi County. A real soul whisperer." Klein silently repeated the phrase and did not say anything. He followed Dunn Smith and got off the horse carriage. Welch's home in Tengen was a bungalow house with a garden. Outside the vertical iron bars gate was a road wide enough for 4 wagons to drive through at the same time. There were street lamps every 50 meters on both sides of the road. The gas lamps were very different from what Klein had seen in his previous life. The height of the posts was approximately that of an adult man. It was designed for ignition convenience. Black metal strips clanged to the glass and enclosed the grids into classical lantern artworks. The lamps burnt in the dark like a dance of the cold and the warm, mixing both shadows and lights. Stepping on the dimly lit road, Klein and Dunn Smith entered via a semi-opened iron gate into Welch's rented residence. Right behind the gate was a path for 2 carriages. It was paved with concrete and connected to the 2-floor bungalow. There was a garden on the left, a lawn on the right. The mild scent of floral, mixed with a touch of freshness, produced a pleasing ambience. As soon as he stepped in, Klein could suddenly feel something wrong. He glanced around nervously. He felt that in the garden, in the shadow of the lawn, on the top of the house, behind the swing, in the dim corners, there were many pairs of eyes watching him. Even though nobody was here, Klein felt as if he was on a bustling street. This was a strange contrast. The bizarre feeling caused him to tighten his body with a chill running down his spine. "There's a problem." He couldn't help but remind Dunn. Dunn walked beside him with an undisturbed expression. He answered calmly. "Don't worry about it." Given that the night watcher had assured him, Klein endured the uncomfortableness of being tracked, being spied on, but wasn't able to see the target. He timidly stepped into the main entrance of the bungalow house. "If this continues, I will get an anxiety attack." As Dunn reached out and knocked on the door, Klein quickly looked back. The flowers swayed in the wind but there was no one. "Come in, gentlemen." A slightly ethereal voice came from inside the house. Dunn twisted the doorknob, pushed open the door, and asked. "Daly, what is the result?" The chandelier in the living room was not lit. A main and 2 auxiliary leather couches surrounded a marble coffee table. On the coffee table, a single candle burnt with a bright blue flame. It shaded the semi-open layout of the living room, dining room, and kitchen in a quivering and treacherous hue. A woman was sitting on the middle couch. She wore a hooded black robe, smeared her face with blue eyeshadows, and had light red paints on her cheeks. She wore a silver bracelet with a silver chain hanging from the wrist. At the first sight of her, Klein had an inexplicable feeling. She was dressed just like a soul whisperer. "Pretending to be yourself?" Daly, the soul whisperer, who was beautiful in an uncanny way, glanced at Klein with twinkling green eyes and then turned her head towards Dunn Smith. The original spirits have disappeared, including Welch's and Naya's. The little ones here are not aware of anything. Spirits? Soul whispering? Those invisible things just now were spirits. There were so many spirits. Klein took off his hat and put it on his chest. He greeted in a mild voice. "Good evening, ma'am." Dunn Smith sighed. "It's really tricky, Daly, this is Klein Moretti. Please try to see if you can discover anything with his help." Daly turned her eyes back to Klein. She pointed to the auxiliary couch. "Please sit down." "Thank you." Klein nodded. He moved across and sat down honestly. At the moment, he couldn't help but felt a tense emotion. Life or death? A smooth ride or a secret exposed? I have to see how it develops. The sense of powerless is because there isn't anything that I can rely on. I can only hope for my inherent specialness. This is really a very bad feeling, Klein thought bitterly. As Dunn took a seat on the couch opposite him, the soul whisperer, Daly took out 2 thumb-sized glass bottles from the pockets around her waist. Her green eyes smiled and looked at Klein. "I need a little help. After all, you are not an enemy. I can't treat you bluntly and violently. It will make you feel uncomfortable, painful, and may even leave severe wounds behind. Therefore, I will give you a little fragrance, a little gentleness, and sufficient lubrication, so that you can relax yourself a bit and immerse in that feeling." It doesn't sound quite right, Klein was astounded. Dunn, who was sitting at opposite, looked amused. "Don't be surprised, unlike the fellows from the Church of the Lord of the Storms, ladies here can also verbally make fun of men. In this regard, you should be able to understand. After all, your mother was a devout believer in the goddess. Both you and your brother had also studied at the church's Sunday school. I understand, just that I did not expect her to be so," Klein gestured. For a moment, he could not find a suitable adjective and almost blurted out the direct translation for veteran driver, 1. Dunn's mouth curved upwards. "Rest assured, Daly actually rarely does this. She just wants to calm you and help you relax. In fact, she likes corpses more than men. You make me sound like a pervert." The soul whisperer, Daly smiled and interrupted. She opened one of the small bottles and sprinkled a few drops onto the brilliant blue candle flame. Night vanilla, sleeping flower, and chamomile. These were mixed and distilled into an essence. I called it Amandi. It means serenity in Hellenese. It has a very pleasing scent. During the conversation, the candlelight flickered a few times, and a few drops of pure liquid evaporated quickly and permeated the room. A calming and charming scent plunged into Klein's nose. He no longer felt tense and he quickly found his composure. He felt as if he was gazing into the darkness in the middle of the night. This bottle is called the Eye of the Spirit. It used the barks and the leaves of dragongrass trees and poplars, which were dried for 7 days and boiled 3 times. It was soaked in Langi wine. Of course, there would be several incantations during the synthesis. As Daly described it, she dripped the amber color liquid onto the brilliant blue candle flame. Klein smelled the scent of wine, it had an ethereal fragrance. He saw the candlelight shaking badly and the blue eyeshadows of Daly flashing with a strange luster. Double images had started appearing in his eyes. It is a good helper for soul whispering, and at the same time a charming enough flower essence. As Daly continued to relate, Klein could only hear her voice coming from all directions. As he looked around in bewilderment, Klein noticed that everything in sight was shaking and blurring, as if layers after layers of fogs were building before him. Even his own body appeared to be trembling, becoming blurred, starting to float weightlessly. The reds were redder, the blues were bluer, and the blacks were darker. The colors were mixed like an impressionist oil painting. They were blurred and dreamy. Soft overlapping whispers rose from the surrounding as if there were numerous people debating. This is a similar feeling to the luck conversion ceremony, but without the kind of madness that made your head feel like exploding. Klein observed and pondered. At this moment, he was attracted by a pair of sparkling emerald-like eyes. He saw the image of Daly wearing a black robe sitting on a vague sofa, and her eyes were very strangely focused on his forehead. She smiled gently. Formally introducing myself, Daly, the Soul Whisperer. This, I can still think calmly and rationally, just like the luck conversion ritual, and that meeting. Klein's thoughts raced through his head and he deliberately showed a dazed expression. Hello. The mental worlds of humans are very vast and there are many hidden secrets. Look at the sea before you. We can only observe the islands that are exposed on the surface. However, under the surface, the islands have large hidden areas. In fact, apart from the islands, there is the entire sea and the boundless sky that symbolizes the spiritual world. You are the spirit of the body. You not only know the islands that are exposed on the sea but also know the parts of the islands underneath the surface. You know the entire sea. What exists will leave a trace. While the memories of the surface of the islands can be erased, the parts under the sea and the entire sea must have retained some corresponding residual projections. Daly guided him again and again. The vague winds and shadows around him also changed in her described shapes, as if Klein's mental sea was fully exposed, waiting for him to search and discover. Klein watched calmly. The waves crashed onto the sea from time to time, and he finally replied. No. I can't remember. I've forgotten. He demonstrated a little pain at the right time. Daly tried to induce him one more time, but the clear-headed Klein was not affected. Well, let's end it here and go back. Go back. Go back. Amidst an ethereal noise, Daly disappeared. The winds and shadows began to subside. The scent of tranquility and subtle scent of wine reappeared. All the colors returned to normal and the fuzziness feelings eased. Klein's body trembled and recovered the feeling of gravity. He opened his eyes and noticed that the lighted blue candle was still in front of him. Dunn Smith was still sitting comfortably on the couch and Daly the Soul Whisperer was in the black robe with a hood. Why did you use the theory of the psychic alchemists? They are a bunch of evil and insane fellows. Dunn frowned slightly and looked at Daly. Daly kept the two small bottles and calmly answered. I think it's quite correct, at least they are in line with the things I've seen and contacted. Not waiting for Dunn to speak again, she spread out her hands. It's tricky, there are no traces left. Hearing these words, Klein heaved a long sigh of relief, asked presumptuously. What happened? What happened just now? I felt like I had fallen asleep. Did I pass the test? Fortunately, I have rehearsed it with the luck conversion ritual. Just take it as such. Dunn interrupted his words and looked at the Soul Whisperer, Daly. Have you checked Welch and Naya's bodies? The bodies can tell us much more than you think. Unfortunately, Welch and Naya had really committed suicide. Or rather, we can say that the power that affected them was really daunting. It left no traces behind. Daly stood up and reached to the candle. I'm going to rest. The brilliant blue flame disappeared and the house was instantly filled with a blurred layer of crimson blush. Congratulations, you can go home, but you must remember that you can't disclose this experience to your family and friends. Please guarantee this. Dunn led Klein all the way to the door. Klein asked curiously. Don't you need to check for curses or the marks of evil spirits? Since Daly didn't mention, it means that there are no such traces, Dunn answered briefly. Klein calmed down and recalled his previous worries. He asked again. How can I confirm that there are no troubles left behind? Don't worry too much. Dunn curved the corner of his mouth as he replied. According to statistics, 80% of the living parties did not encounter any terrible follow-ups. This statistics is based on my rough impression. There's 20% of unlucky people. Klein wouldn't dare to take a gamble. You can consider joining us in a civilian position. In this way, even if there are any precursor signs, we can discover it in time. Dunn said as he approached the carriage, or you can directly become an extraordinary. After all, we are not your nanny, you can't expect us to watch over you all day and night, even when you are doing things with women. Can I? Klein asked along the way. Of course, he didn't expect much. After all, how could it be so easy to join the Night Watcher and gain extraordinary power? That's extraordinary power. Dunn paused and took a sideways glance at him. It is not impossible, it depends, what? This transition surprised Klein. He stopped beside the carriage. Really? Are you kidding? Is it that easy to become an extraordinary? Dunn chuckled and his gray eyes were covered by the shadow of the carriage. You don't believe me? In fact, if you become a Night Watcher, you will lose many things, such as freedom. Apart from this, there are other problems. Firstly, you are not a clergyman who made a contribution nor a staunch believer. You won't have many options and you can't choose the safest path. Secondly, Dunn grabbed the handrail and boarded the carriage. For us, the tribunal representatives, the heart of the machines, and other similar judicial departments, a quarter of the cases that we handled annually are extraordinaries who have lost control. A quarter. Extraordinaries who have lost control, Klein was stunned. At this moment, Dunn half turned his body. His pupils were dark and gray pupil, and he spoke emotionlessly. In this quarter, a large number of them used to be our teammates. TN, veteran driver, Chinese internet meme for someone who is experienced at posting pornographic materials in forums. Why? Hearing Dunn's words, Klein was totally shocked and he instinctively asked. Do extraordinaries have serious hidden deficiencies? Even the judiciary departments in the churches, as well as the extraordinary teams dealing with dangerous incidents, are also prone to those underlying problems. Dunn Smith stepped into the carriage and sat down in his previous position. He maintained a casual expression and tone. This is not something that you need to know nor something that you can understand unless you become a member of us. Klein was dumbstruck. He sat down, feeling that it was a little absurd and incomprehensible. If I don't figure this out, how can I make the decision to join? Without joining, I can't figure it out, this is an endless cycle. Dunn Smith took out his pipe again. He put it close to his nose and took a light sniff. You probably misunderstood what I meant. One of us includes civilian positions. What you meant is that as long as I become a civilian staff member, I will be exposed to the relevant secrets, and understand the hidden risks of becoming extraordinary as well as the dangers that the Night Watchers may encounter. After that, I can consider whether I want to become an extraordinary or not. Klein sorted out the idea and rephrased it in his own words. Dunn smiled and answered. That's right, except for one point. Even if you want to become an extraordinary, it doesn't mean that you will definitely be able to become one. In this aspect, the major churches are equally strict in their selection requirements. That's expected, Klein muttered. He used hand gestures to emphasize as he continued to probe for more information. What about the requirements for civilian staff? Is that supposed to be strict too? If it's you, there should be no problem. Dunn's eyes were half closed, he showed a relaxed expression while sniffing the pipe, yet he did not light the tobacco. Why? Klein was once again confused. At the same time, he joked to himself in his heart. Am I so special that my transmigrator aura is like a firefly in the dark, so brilliant and outstanding? Dunn opened his half-closed eyes. His gray pupils were as deep and profound as before. Firstly, you can survive such a supernatural event without our help. This shows that you have an advantage that differentiates you from ordinary people. For example, being lucky. Everyone likes working with a lucky person. Seeing that Klein showed a slightly dazed expression, he smiled slightly and continued. Well, you can take that as a humorous statement. Secondly, you are a graduate of the history department in the Hoi University. This is an expertise that we have a real demand for. Even though Lurmi, a believer of the Lord of the Storm, held an awful attitude towards women. He had very sharp and salient views on society, culture, economics, and politics. He asserted many times that talents are a key factor in maintaining competitive advantage and prosperity. I agree with this. Noticing that Klein was frowning slightly, he explained briefly. You should be able to imagine that we often come into contact with documents and relics from the Fourth Epoch or even earlier epochs. Many cults and heretics have been trying to gain powers from these items. Sometimes, the items themselves can also lead to strange and terrible encounters. Except for extraordinaries in specific fields, most of us are not good at learning, or have passed that age. Here, Dunn Smith pointed to his head, and the edge of his mouth was slightly curved. Those boring and dry pieces of knowledge always make people drowsy, even the sleepless can't resist it. In the past, we used to cooperate with historians and archaeologists, but there is a risk of secret leakages, and it may also bring unfortunate experiences to the professors and associate professors. Therefore, it would be beneficial if a professional can join us and become a member of the team. Klein nodded lightly, he agreed with Dunn's explanation and asked along the line. So why didn't you directly involve, or invite someone? Dunn continued to speak. That is the third point, which is the final and most important point. You have already been exposed to similar incidents. Therefore, inviting you does not violate our confidentiality clauses. If we were to invite someone else, we will have to bear the responsibility of secret disclosure if they reject the invitation. Therefore, our team members and civilian staffs mostly come from within the church. After listening quietly, Klein curiously said. Why are you so strict on the confidentiality? If things are announced and the information is spread to more people, can't you avoid the same mistakes happening again? The biggest fear for humans come from the unknowns, and we can make the unknowns become knowns. No, human stupidity is beyond your imagination, it will lead to more imitations, greater confusions, and more serious calamities. Dunn Smith shook his head and replied. Klein gave an in agreement. The only lesson that humans have learned from history is that human beings cannot learn any lessons from history and are always repeating the same tragedies. The famous quote of Russell the Great is indeed philosophical. Dunn concurred. What, it was used by Russell the Great. The Transmigration Senior had really covered all angles, leaving no room for a junior to show off. Klein didn't know what to say. Dunn turned his head and looked out of the carriage. The dim yellow lights of the street lamps formed the brilliance of civilization. There is a similar phrase within the judicial divisions of the major churches. This may be the main reason for the strict confidentiality and prohibition of masses from knowing. What is it? Klein was thrilled to have the opportunity to listen to such a secret. Dunn turned his head and his facial muscles slightly twitched. Beliefs and fears bring disasters, more beliefs and fears bring greater disasters until everything becomes destroyed. After saying this, he sighed. Apart from praying for the shelter and the help of the gods, mankind alone cannot solve the really big disasters. Beliefs and fears bring disasters, more beliefs and fears bring greater disasters. Klein silently repeated this sentence. He couldn't quite get the meaning of the phrase. Due to the fear of the unknown, he felt that there were hidden pairs of malicious eyes and open jaws lurking in the shadows of the street lamps, in the areas of darkness. The horse moved swiftly and the carriage wheels spun rapidly. Soon, Iron Cross Street could be seen in the distance. Suddenly, Dunn broke the silence and made an official invitation. Would you like to join us as a civilian staff? Klein's thoughts raced through his mind, but temporarily he was not able to make a decision. He deliberated for a moment and asked. Can I think about it? This is a decision of great importance and should not be made recklessly. No problem, just give me a reply before Sunday. Dunn nodded. Of course, remember to maintain confidentiality. You can't tell others about Welch's incident, including your brother and sister. It will bring them troubles and you may be summoned to a special court. I understand. Klein solemnly agreed. The carriage fell back to silence. Seeing that Iron Cross Street was approaching and the home was near, Klein suddenly thought of a question. He hesitated for a few seconds and asked. Mr. Smith, what about the salary and benefits of the civilian staffs? This is a serious question. Dunn paused for a moment and he smiled. Don't worry about this problem, our funds are jointly guaranteed by the church and the police department. The civilian staffs who have just entered can receive a weekly salary of £2.10. There is also 10 Sul as confidentiality and risk subsidies. The total is £3. This is not much less than a formal university lecturer. After that, as long as you stay with us and made corresponding contributions, the salary will gradually increase. For civilian staffs, we generally use a 5-year contract. If you are not willing to continue after 5 years, you can leave your job normally, except that you will need to sign a lifetime confidentiality clause. You can't leave Tengen without our approval. Even if you move to another city, you will have to register with the local night watchers. Additionally, there are no weekends as the rest days are on a rotation basis. At any point in time, there need to be 3 civilian staffs in office. If you want to go to the south or to Desi Bay for a vacation, you will need to coordinate with your colleagues. After Dunn finished, the carriage stopped and Klein's apartment appeared on the side of the road. I got it. Klein turned and got off the carriage. He stopped beside the carriage. By the way, Mr. Smith, if I decide to accept the invitation, where should I go and find you? Dunn smiled and replied in a low voice. Go to the Hounds Tavern on Basiki Street and look for the owner, Mr. Wright. Inform him that you are hiring a mercenary squad for a mission. Ah. Klein was confused. Our address is also confidential. I cannot tell you directly before you agree to join us. Well, Mr. Klein Moretti, I wish you good dreams tonight. Dunn smiled and bade farewell. Klein took off his hat and watched the carriage picked up speed and disappeared from sight. He took out his pocket watch and flicked it open. It was only 4 in the morning. The cold breeze on the street was refreshing and the street lights were dim. Klein took a deep breath and embraced the quietness of the night. The noisiest and most crowded neighborhood during the day was totally silent and empty in the middle of the night. It felt very different from the unseen pairs of eyes in Welch's residence and the hallucinations during the soul whispering. Until this time, he finally realized that the back of his linen shirt was full of sweat. It was cold and wet. I have finally passed the test of the soul whisperer. Klein breathed out a sigh and slowly turned around. While he was enjoying the tranquility of the night and the cool breeze, he started walking towards the apartment door. He took out the key, inserted it, and gently twisted it. As the door screeched, he could see a black and crimson blush expanding before his eyes. Walking on the empty staircase and breathing in the cold air, Klein had an unusual feeling of earning a few more hours of life than others, such that his footsteps became brisk. He maintained a similar mentality and opened his own house door, but before he stepped in, he saw a figure sitting quietly in the darkness in front of the desk. Her dark hair was bathed in the crimson. Her brown pupils sparkled and her face showed graceful features. It was Melissa Moretti. Klein, where have you been? Melissa frowned and asked, wondering. Not waiting for Klein to answer, she added another sentence. It was as if she was analyzing the cause and effect of the matter, providing a logical relationship to her conclusion. I just got up, went to the washroom, and noticed that you were not at home. Klein had a wealth of experience in lying to parents. A thought flashed through his mind, and he quickly answered with a wry smile. After I woke up, I couldn't sleep. I thought that instead of wasting my time, I should go and do some exercises. Therefore, I went out and ran a few laps. As you can see, I am sweating all over. He took off his coat, turned his body sideways, and pointed at the back of his shirt. Melissa stood up and glanced at it casually. She pondered for a few seconds. Klein, in fact, you don't have to be like this. Don't give yourself too much pressure. You can definitely pass the interview at the University of Tengen. Even if you don't, if, you can always find something better. I have not given any thoughts to the interview, Klein nodded. I know. He did not mention that he had already received an offer, and was in fact considering whether or not he should accept it. Melissa took a deep look at him. She suddenly turned around, ran into the room, and took out a turtle-like item made up of gears, rusted iron, and springs. She quickly wound up the spring and placed the item on the desk. The turtle bounced and moved. It was very rhythmic and attention-catching. Whenever I am troubled, I feel so much better watching it bounce and move. It makes you feel much more comfortable. I have experienced it many times and it is very effective. Klein, you should give it a try. Melissa's eyes shone brightly. Klein didn't refuse his sister's kindness, he placed his head closer to the turtle and observed it until it stopped moving. Then, he laughed. Simplicity and regularity can really help relaxation. Not waiting for Melissa to continue, he pointed to the turtle and asked casually. Did you make it yourself? When did you assemble it? How come I wasn't aware? I put it together with the unwanted materials from the school as well as the things I picked up from the roadside. It was only completed 2 days ago. Melissa gave a nonchalant expression, but the corners of her mouth were a little curled. It's amazing. Klein praised from the bottom of his heart. As a boy with poor mechanical skills, he couldn't even assemble a four-wheel toy car when he was a child. Melissa lifted her chin slightly, her eyes were slightly bent, yet her tone was flat. It is just average. Excessive modesty is bad for you. Klein chuckled. Is this a turtle? The atmosphere in the room suddenly froze. After a while, Melissa's voice came as soft as a feather. It is a human doll, human doll. Klein smiled awkwardly and forced an explanation. The problem lies with the materials. That's why it is so rudimentary. Then, he shifted the topic. How come you are going to the bathroom in the middle of the night? Isn't there a toilet inside? Don't you always sleep until dawn? Melissa was stunned for a moment. It took a few seconds before she opened her mouth and tried to explain. Just then, there was a violent sound of digestion coming from her stomach and abdomen. I will go to sleep again. Boom. She grabbed the turtle-like doll, sped back into the room, and closed the door. Yesterday's dinner was too good, she ate too much, and her stomach is not adapted. Klein shook his head and smiled. He walked slowly to the desk and sat down on the chair in silence. As he watched the red moon drifting behind the dark clouds, he began to quietly evaluate the invitation from Dunn Smith. The disadvantage of being a civilian staff of the Night Watcher team was very obvious. As a transmigrator, as the initiator of the mysterious meeting, and as the fool, he had a lot of secrets. It was risky to spend long periods of time under the eyes of the Night Watchers. After all, it was the team under the Church of the Goddess of the Night which specialized in dealing with supernatural events. As long as he joined Dunn Smith, his goal would definitely be to become an extraordinary. It would allow him to cover up the benefits of the meeting. However, his freedom would be restricted if he were to become a full member. Just as civilian staffs leaving Tengen needed to make a declaration, he would also not be able to go wherever he wanted to go. There would be many missed opportunities. The Night Watcher was a strict and formal organization. Once there was a task, he would need to wait for the arrangements. He would have to accept the assignments and would not be able to refuse them. Extraordinaries also had the risk of getting out of control. Noting the disadvantages in mind, Klein started to consider the benefits. From the luck conversion ritual and other encounters, I can guess that I am not one of the lucky ones in the 80% mentioned by Dunn. There will inevitably be follow-ups of strange incidents. There will be many incoming dangers. The only ways to defend against them are either to become an extraordinary or join the Night Watchers. To become an extraordinary, meetings alone are insufficient. While it is not problematic to lay hands on potion formulas, there are serious obstacles in getting the corresponding materials, mixing the potions, and learning about pieces of common knowledge of extraordinaries in their daily practices. It is impossible to ask Justice and the Hangman everything, or exchange with them for materials. This will not only tarnish the image of the fool, but also make them suspicious. Additionally, there is not so much time to communicate on the finer details. Lastly, the biggest problem is that I cannot offer anything that they are interested in. In addition, material exchanges will leave traces of my real identity. At that time, it will be a huge problem if the online disputes turn into offline conflicts. Joining the Night Watchers will inevitably expose me to the common senses and relevant channels of the mysterious world. It will allow me to accumulate enough useful relationships. Using this as a pivot to initiate meetings, I can make the best of the exchanges with Justice and the Hanged Man. The gains can feedback to improve my situation in real life, and it can form a virtual cycle to obtain more resources. Of course, I can also go to the Psychic Alchemists group that was mentioned by Dunn, or similar organizations that have been suppressed by the major churches. However, becoming a member of them will also equate to losing one's freedom, and I will probably have to stay in fear all the time. The biggest problem is that I don't even know where to search for them. Even if I obtain the corresponding information from the Hanged Man, making contacts can have life-threatening risks. By becoming a civilian staff, it leaves opportunities for buffer and exit. The Night Watcher's identity can also be a good cover. In the future, among the chiefs of the tribunal departments, who can imagine that I am a heresy, the hidden boss behind the secret organization? The dawn lights shone into the window, and the crimson blush disappeared. Klein stared at the golden sky and made up his mind. I will go to Dunn Smith today and become a civilian staff of the Night Watchers. You didn't sleep. At this moment, Melissa got up again and pushed the door open. She was surprised to see her brother yawning beside the table. Thinking about something. Klein smiled and relaxed. Melissa thought for a moment. Whenever I meet a difficult decision, I will list the advantages and the disadvantages one by one. After the list is finished, you can compare it and you will get a hint on what should be done. Good habit, I did the same. Klein smiled. Melissa did a stretch and didn't say much more. She took a few large, yellowish sheets of paper and washing items and headed to the public washroom. After breakfast, Melissa left the house. Klein was not in a hurry to go out. Instead, he took a pleasant nap. It was because he was aware that almost all the pubs wouldn't open for business in the morning. At 2 in the afternoon, Klein smoothed the pleats of the top hat with a small brush. With a handkerchief, he removed the dirt to turn it clean and tidy. Then, he went out in formal attire, just as if he was going to an interview. Bisiki Street was a little far away. Klein was afraid to miss the working hours of the Night Watchers. Therefore, instead of walking, he waited for the arrival of the public carriage at the intersection of Iron Cross Street. In the Kingdom of Ruin, there were 2 types of public carriages, the untracked and the tracked. The former consisted of 2 horses, it could seat 20 people factoring in the top of the carriage. It served only general routes, with no specific stations, and flexible operations. You could stop it whenever you want unless it was full. The latter was operated by the Orbital Carriage Company. First, a railway-like track was laid on the main street. The horses moved on the inside and the wheels ran on the tracks. It was easy and labor-saving. Therefore, they could handle a larger double-decker carriage that sat up to 50 guests. The problem was that the routes were fixed, the stations were fixed, and it could not go to many places. It was a less flexible form of transport. After 10 minutes, the sounds of the wheels hitting the tracks appeared in the distance. Soon, a double-decker carriage stopped in front of the station at Iron Cross Street. To Besiki Street, Klein said to the coachman. You have to go to Champagne Street, but when you get there, it is only 10 minutes walk to Besiki Street. The coachman explained the route. To Champagne Street then. Klein nodded. It is more than 4 kilometers. 4 pence. A young man with a clean face standing next to the coachman extended his hands. He was the staff responsible for collecting money. Okay. Klein took out 4 copper pennies from his pocket and handed it to the other party. He walked into the carriage and noticed that there were not many passengers. There were quite a few vacancies on the first floor. There are only 3 pence left on me. Thus, I will have to walk back. Klein pressed his hat and sat down firmly. The gentlemen and ladies on this floor were mostly dressed in formal attire. There were also some people wearing work attires and reading newspapers leisurely. Almost no one was chatting and it was rather quiet. Klein closed his eyes to recharge himself. He did not want to spend time looking at the coming and going of the passengers. As the carriage passed one stop after another, he finally heard the words, Champagne Street. After getting off the carriage and asking for directions along the way, he soon reached Besiki Street and saw a pub with a brown and yellow hound logo. Klein stretched out his arm and pushed forcefully. The heavy door slowly creaked open and the noises and heat wave rushed towards him. Although it was only in the afternoon, there were already many customers in the pub. Some of them were temporary workers looking for opportunities, waiting to be hired. There were many others doing nothing, using alcohol to paralyze themselves. The inside of the pub was quite dim. There were 2 large iron cages in the center. The lower parts of the cages were semi-buried into the ground without any gap. People held wooden wine glasses and surrounded them. They were talking loudly and sometimes they cursed and laughed. Klein curiously glanced at it and discovered that there were 2 dogs in it. One was black and white, like the huskies on Earth. The other was dark, had shiny furs, and was fierce-looking. Do you want to bet? Doug has won 8 games in a row. A short man in a brown bonnet came close and pointed at the black dog. Bet? Klein was stunned for a moment and he immediately realized. Dog fighting? At Hoey's University, the aristocratic students and wealthy children would always ask him contemptuously and curiously, do the crude workers and the unemployed hooligans like to participate in boxing and gambling in the pubs? In addition to boxing and playing cards, do gambling activities include cockfighting and dog fighting? The short man smiled and said, Sir, we are civilized people. We will not do such indecent things. Having said that, he whispered. Furthermore, last year, laws were introduced to ban such activities, so what are you betting on? Klein was curious. To bet who is a better hunter. Just as the short man finished, there was a commotion on the ground. He turned his head and rubbed his hands in excitement. This game has started, you can't bet now. Let's wait for the next round. As Klein heard the words, he tipped his toes, raised his head, and glanced into the distance. He saw 2 brawny men dragging a sack each. They came to the iron cage, opened the prison door, and dumped the things inside. They were gray, foul animals. Klein carefully observed and found that they were rats. Hundreds of rats. The bottoms of the iron cages were deep underground and there were no gaps. While the rats were running around, they could not escape. At this time, the chains of the 2 dogs were untied as the cage door closed. Woof! The black dog rushed over and killed a rat. The black and white dog had a confused look on its face, then it started to play with the rats in excitement. People standing around were either holding glasses of alcohol, gazing attentively, or shouting loudly. Bite it! Kill it! Doug, Doug! What the? Dogs catching rats? Klein started to recognize the situation and twitched the corner of his mouth. The gambling event here was actually betting which dog could catch the most rats. Maybe you can even bet how many rats are caught. No wonder there are people buying live rats on the Iron Cross Street. This is really unique. Klein shook his head and stepped back. He moved around the crowd of alcoholic people and came to the front of the bar. New customer. The bartender looked up from the glass that he was cleaning. 1 penny for a cup of rye beer, 2 pence for an malt beer, 4 pence for Southville beer, or would you like a cup of purely brewed malt Langy? I am looking for Mr. Wright. Klein was straight to the point. The bartender whistled and shouted to the side. Old man, someone is looking for you. Hey, who is that? A vague voice came out, and a drunk old man stood up from behind the bar. He blinked and examined Klein. Young man, are you looking for me? Mr. Wright, I want to hire a mercenary squad to do a mission, Klein replied in accordance with Dunn's instructions. A mercenary squad? Are you living in an adventure story? We haven't had that for a long time. The bartender interrupted with a chuckle. Wright was silent for a few seconds. Who told you to come here? Dunn Smith, Klein answered honestly. Wright immediately gave a laughter. I get it. In fact, mercenary squads still exist. They have just changed their forms and their names to something closer to the current society. You can find one on the second floor of number 36, Zutland Street. Thank you. Klein sincerely thanked the old man. He turned and squeezed his way out of the bar. Just as he was exiting the door, the customers around him suddenly quieted down to only a series of whispers. Doug has lost, Klein smiled and shook his head in amusement. He left the bar quickly and asked for the directions to the nearby Zutland Street. 30, 32, 34, here. He counted the house number and walked up the stairs. Turning around the corner and stepping up the stairs, he saw a vertical sign and the current name of the so-called mercenary squad. Blackthorn Security Company. Blackthorn Security Company. Seeing the signboard, Keene was stunned for quite a while. He felt that it was unexpected but reasonable at the same time. It's really. I don't know how to say, he shook his head and laughed. Then, he stretched out his right hand and tapped on the half-covered door. Done. 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 The slow and rhythmic knocking of the door echoed, but there was no response. He could only the faint sound of da-da-da that came from behind the door. Done. 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 Klein repeated it again, but it was the same result. He changed from knock to push. As the gap widened, he glanced into the room and saw a group of classically designed sofas that were perhaps used for reception. There were a few soft-cushioned chairs and a wooden-color coffee table. There was also a table placed directly opposite the door. Behind the table, he could see a girl's head dropping low as if she was sleeping. Although the security company is only a disguise, but is this too much? Is this too unprofessional? How long has it been without any business? Well, you don't need any business, Klein muttered in his mind. He walked into the room and leaned close to the table. Then, he knocked on the table twice, closed the girl's ear. Done. Done. The brown-haired girl instinctively sat up straight. She grabbed the newspaper in front of her hands and covered her face. Tengen's Honest Paper, what an interesting brand name, Klein silently read the newspaper in front of his face. The steam train, the Flyer, will be connected to Constant City today. Really, when can it be connected to Desi Bay? I don't want to go there by boat anymore, it's so uncomfortable, too uncomfortable. Hey, who are you? The brown-haired girl pretended to read aloud and made a comment. Then, she lowered the newspaper, revealed a smooth forehead and light brown eyes, and turned to Klein. Hello, I am Klein Moretti, I am here at the invitation of Mr. Dunn Smith. Klein took off his hat and placed it on his chest. The brown-haired girl appeared to be in her early 20s. She wore a simple, light green ruin-style long dress. There were beautiful laces at the cuffs, neckline, chest and other places, which paired well with her beautiful face. You mean Captain? Okay, please wait here, I will ask him. The girl hurriedly got up and entered the room from the side door. And you don't even ask if I need a glass of water. The level of service is worrying. Klein smiled a little. He stood in the same place and waited, with no intention to sit on the sofa and chair. After 2 or 3 minutes, the brown-haired girl pushed the door out and smiled sweetly. Mr. Moretti, please follow me, the captain is on duty today at Chan's Gate and can't leave. Okay. Klein quickly walked behind. In his mind, he pondered. Chan's Gate, what is that? Walking past the partition, the first thing that came into his eyes was a corridor that was not very long. There were 3 office doors on each side of the corridor. Some of these offices were tightly locked, some were open, and people inside could be seen typing furiously and noisily using heavy mechanical typewriters. Glancing around, Klein noticed a familiar person. He was the young police officer who searched his house that day, the one with dark hair and blue eyes and a poet's romantic temperament. He didn't wear a formal attire. Instead, he had put on a white shirt that wasn't tucked in his trousers, giving a mischievous impression. Maybe he is really a poet. Klein nodded his head in acknowledgement and the other returned a smile. The brown-haired girl forcefully twisted the handle of the left office at the end of the corridor. She pushed open the door, pointed to the inside and smiled. This leads to a few floors downwards. There were no decorations nor furniture in this office. There was only a set of grey-white stone steps extending downwards. The walls on both sides of the stairs were lined with elegantly designed gas lamps. The steady light dispelled the darkness and brought a sense of peace. The brown-haired girl led the way in front. She kept staring at her feet as she moved cautiously. Although I walked here often, I am still scared. I will always worry about falling and rolling over. You know, Leonard had done such a stupid act in the past. On the first day of becoming a sleepless, when he had yet to master his own abilities, he tried to sprint down the stairs. And then, he became a wheel. Huh, it's so funny to think of it. Well, I'm talking about the guy who greeted you just now. It's been 3 years since then. Speaking of which, I have been in the night watcher for 5 years now. Back then I was only 17 years old. While the girl was looking down at the road, she started to strike a conversation habitually. Suddenly, she patted her own forehead in a hidden way. Oh, I've forgotten to introduce myself, my name is Roseanne. My father was a formal member of the Night Watchers, and he sacrificed in an accident 5 years ago. We should be colleagues in the future. Well, it is more accurate to use the term colleagues, since we are not teammates. After all, we are not extraordinaries. I hope to have this honor, but in the end, it's Mr. Smith's decision. Klein looked at the enclosed surrounding. He could sense that the two of them had begun to enter the underground. The stone wall was permeated with coldness and wetness, which dispelled the summer heat. Reassured, since you are allowed to come here, it shows that Captain has agreed. I have always been afraid of the Captain, although he is very kind, very caring, just like a father. But I do not know why I am afraid. Roseanne's voice came softly. Klein responded humorously. Isn't it normal to be afraid of one's father? That makes sense. Roseanne reached out and supported herself using the wall at the corner. During the conversation, the two finished walking the downward spiral staircase and reached the flat stone ground. This was a long aisle ahead. The gas lamps were surrounded by metal grids and embedded on the walls on both sides. The lights shone down and dragged the shadows of Klein and Roseanne far into the distance. Klein keenly observed the surrounding and noticed that there were many dark sacred emblems, each at a regular distance on the wall. This was the symbol of the goddess of the night, a deep black background, adorned with half a crimson moon. These sacred emblems seemed to be nothing special, but walking between them, Klein's state of mind gradually calmed down. Even Roseanne closed her mouth and stopped chatting like she was just now. Not long after, a crossroad appeared in front of them and the brown-haired girl briefly introduced. Turn left to the Church of Saint Serena. Turn right to the Library of Weapons, Materials, and Documents. Walk straight to Chan's Gate. Church of Saint Serena. Is Zutland Street at the back of Red Moon Street? Klein was a little stunned. The Saint Serena Church on Red Moon Street was the headquarters for the Goddess of the Night Church in Tengen. It was the sacred place that all local devotees were yearning to visit. On the other hand, the scared numeric Church of the God of Steam and Machinery was located in the suburbs, while the River and Sea Church of the Lord of the Storms was located in North Tengen. Together, these three churches jointly supported the religious circles of Tengen City as well as the affiliated towns and villages. Conscious that his current identity was not suitable for probing too much, Klein just listened silently and did not ask any questions. After crossing the intersection and walking straight, in less than a minute, a black iron gate with 7 holy emblems appeared before the two of them. It stood there, intuitively gave a sense of heaviness, coldness, and majesty. It was like a giant standing guard the darkness. Chan's Gate, Roseanne said. Then, she pointed to a room next to the gate. The captain is inside, you can enter yourself. Okay, thanks for your trouble. Klein politely replied. The room that Roseanne pointed to was just in front of the Chan's Gate. It had an opened window and lights could be seen coming out from it. Klein took a deep breath and calmed down. Done. 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 Come in. Dunn Smith's low and welcoming voice came out. Klein gently pushed open the semi-closed door. He saw a table and 4 chairs in the room. The high hairline Dunn Smith was wearing the same type of black windbreaker as last night. He was reading a newspaper leisurely, and there was a gold watch chain appearing beside his left chest button. Please sit down, have you thought through the decision? Are you sure you want to join us? Dunn put down the newspaper and asked with a smile. Klein took off his hat and greeted Dunn. Then, he sat down at the table and nodded slowly. Yes, I'm sure. Then, you can take a look at this contract. Now everyone likes to call it a contract. Dunn opened the table drawer and took out 2 copies of a contract. There were not many of terms on the contract. Most of those were already mentioned by Dunn Smith. It mainly focused on the confidentiality clause. The violators no longer passed through the Kingdom Court but would be directly put on trial by the arbitral tribunal of the Church of the Goddess of the Night. The procedure was similar to the military, where convicted officers would be put on trial in military courts. 5-year contract. £2 and 10 souls weekly salary, 10 souls confidentiality and risk subsidies. Klein finished reading the terms one by one, and firmly answer. I'm okay. You can sign it. Dunn pointed to the dark red pen and ink bottle on the table. Klein first tested the pen with a waste paper, then he took a sigh of relief and signed his own name in the corresponding position of the 2 contracts, Klein Moretti. Because he had no stamp, he could only impress his fingerprint. Dunn took back the contract and retrieved a seal from the drawer, after which he stamped at the end and several key points on the papers. After doing all this, he stood up and passed back a contract with one hand and extended the other hand towards Klein for a handshake. Welcome. From now on, you are one of us. Note that the contract must also be kept confidentially. Klein stood up and took the contract. He shook Dunn's hand and smiled. So, should I call you Captain? Yes. Dunn's gray pupils were unusually deep and profound in the dimly lit environment. After the handshake, the two sat down again. Klein glanced at the stamp on the contract and noticed that the imprint was Night Watcher Team, City of Tengen, Alwa County, Ruin Kingdom. I didn't expect you to use the Blackthorn Security Company as a cover. He laughed and asked casually. Actually, we do have another identity. Dunn took out a piece of paper from the drawer. It was stamped with the double seal of the municipal government and the police department. The content was 2 lines of words. The 7th Special Operations Team, Police Department, City of Tengen, Alwa County, Ruin Kingdom. The first 4 teams are normal police officers who are responsible for security, such as the VIP Protection Group and the Key Installation Protection Group. From the 5th team onwards, we are responsible for the supernatural events in the various cities in the county. The 7th team covers believers of the goddess in Tengen. If the believers of multiple religions are involved, the case will be allocated by region. We are mainly in charge of the North, the West, and the Golden Indus area. Done roughly introduced, the 6th team is the tribunal representatives of the Church of the Lord of the Storm, and they are responsible for the dock area, the East, and the South. The 5th team covers the university area and the suburbs. They are the heart of the machine squad in Tengen. Klein couldn't find anything to ask in this area. He smiled and changed the topic. If someone comes to request a task for the Blackthorn Security Company, what should I do? Accept it, why not? As long as it does not affect our daily affairs. Dunn replied gently and humorously. If you can earn money from these tasks, you can count it as an additional subsidy. The team members will be happy too. Anyway, the market for trivial matters such as looking for cats and dogs have already been dominated by private detectives. How many people are there in the Night Watcher team? Klein asked along the same topic. There are not many supernatural events, thus there are not many extraordinaries. We have 6 formal members in the Night Watcher team in Tengen, including me. Oh, the number of civilian staffs, counting you, is also 6. Dunn replied casually. Klein nodded and finally asked the question that he was most concerned about. Captain, what do you mean by extraordinaries losing control? Why does it happen? When he heard Klein's question, Dunn glanced out the window at the corridor of the Chan's gate. He took out his own pipe, stuffed it with tobacco and mint leaves, then put it beside the nose. As he sniffed a deep breath, his voice was slightly erratic. Only at home can I enjoy the wonderful taste of tobacco and mint leaves in an unscrupulous way. Klein, do you know the myth of creation? Of course, when I received my primary education from the Sunday school, I had learned the language using the Revelation of the Night. The chapters, Book of Wisdom and Letters from the Saints had both mentioned the myth of creation. Klein recalled the original self's fragmented memory and slowed down as he spoke. The Creator woke up from the chaos, he shattered the darkness, created the first ray of light, and completely integrated into the universe. The Creator transformed into the world, his body became the earth and the stars, one of his eyes turned into the sun, and the other one turned into the red moon. Some of his blood rushed into the seas and the rivers, nourishing and nurturing lives. As he reiterated, Klein subconsciously paused. It was half because the related memories were vague, and a half because the creation myth was little similar to the story of Pangu. 1. The imaginations of people in different worlds on myths and legends have something in common. Notice that Klein encountered difficulty in reciting. Dunn smiled and helped him continue. His lungs turned into the elves, his heart turned into the giants, his liver turned into the Treants, his head turned into the dragons, his kidneys turned into the feather serpents, his hair turned into the immortal birds, his ears turned into the demonic wolves, his mouth and teeth turned into the unusual species, and his remaining body fluid turned into sea monsters, the essence of which was Naga. His stomach, his small intestine, and the evil parts of his body turned into demons, evil spirits, and all kinds of unknown malicious existences. His spirit became the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of the storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. The human beings were born out his wisdom. This was the first epoch, the epoch of chaos. Klein finished the last sentence. In his heart, he felt funny and ridiculous. As a keyboard folklorist, it was the first time for him to come into contact with such a detailed arrangement in a creation myth. It was detailed to an extent that each of the prominent races was described as a body part of the Creator. It's like children sitting in a row and receiving fruit. Moreover, this was not only mentioned in the literature of the Goddess of the Night, but also by the Church of the Lord of the Storms, and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. None of the religions praised itself alone or devalued the rest of the gods. This either indicates that the creation myth is real or that the several churches in the prehistoric periods, before the fifth epoch, had finally reached an agreement after a long period of struggles and compromises. Thinking of this, Klein suddenly had another question. He frowned slightly and asked. I am little confused. Why were the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of the storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom born directly from the spirit of the Creator, and yet the goddess was not? In the prehistoric records of the Revelations of the Night, the goddess of the night did not wake up until the end of the second epoch. Together with the Lord of the storms, the eternal blazing sun, and other gods, she blessed and helped humans to survive the cataclysm. It was also known as the third epoch, epoch of cataclysm. The goddess of earth and the god of war also appeared in the same period. On the other hand, the god of steam and machinery, formerly known as the god of craftsmanship, was only born in the fourth epoch. In this way, the status of the god seemed to be self-evident. Who was more ancient, who was more orthodox, was very clear. This would have caused some troubles for the believers of the goddess of the night. Dunn Smith held the pipe with his other hand. He did not answer but asked another question. Can you describe the complete title of the goddess? Klein felt that he had stabbed himself with a knife. He racked his brains and tried to recall. She is nobler than the stars and more ancient than eternity. She is the goddess of the night, also known as the Lady of Crimson, the mother of occult, the queen of troubles and fears, and the ruler of peace and silence. Fortunately, Klein's mother was a devout follower of the goddess of the night. When she was alive, she used to recite this every evening and before every meal. Even if the memory of the original self had become fragmented, it was not be lost. What does the Lady of Crimson symbolizes? Dunn asked in a guiding tone. The red moon. When Klein finished speaking, he seemed to understand. Which part of the Creator did the red moon came from? Dunn smiled and asked. A single eye. Klein and Dunn smiled at each other. This was no worse than the Lord of the Storm, which was formed by 1/3 of the spirit of the Creator. As for the goddess of earth and the god of war, their churches should have similar explanations. Only the god of steam and machinery was born too late to find a reason. Their church had been weak in the past 1,000 years until the steam engine was invented. Only after then, it managed to seize the opportunity and become truly on par with the other gods. Dunn stroked the pipe gently. Human beings were born from the wisdom of the Creator, so we have a clever and extraordinary brain but lack magical abilities. However, from the creation myth, we can derive a simple and clear conclusion. Everything comes from the same origin. The same origin, Klein repeated the last few words. According to this conclusion, under the shelter of the gods, human beings confronted the giants, the demons, and the unusual species. We have gradually explored ways to obtain extraordinary powers. This is by using the corresponding parts of the evil spirits, the dragons, the monsters, the magical trees, flowers, or crystals. Combining those with other materials, we prepare them into potions. In this way, we can absorb and master different abilities. This is a common knowledge for all extraordinary paths. Dunn didn't dive into the details. He had only made a brief introduction. In the process, our ancestors relied on painful lessons to discover out that if you took high-grade, hyper-extraordinary potions directly, it would easily to lead to tragedies. There were only 3 possible outcomes. Which 3? Klein curiously asked. First, mental death and physical breakdown. Every piece of flesh and every drop of blood transformed into a terrible monster. Second, the powers in the potions would instantly change one's personality. One would become cold, sensitive, irritable, cruel, and indifferent. Third, well, Dunn put down the pipe and picked up the porcelain cup next to him. He took a sip. Firmer coffee from the Paz Valley is very bitter but also very fragrant. It has a great aftertaste. Do you like to have a cup? I prefer Feneto Plateau's coffee. Of course, I had only tasted it a few times at Welch's house. Klein politely refused. What about the third? Mental abnormality, madness on the spot, more devilish than the devil, this is known as losing control. Dunn added an accent on the word, losing control. Not waiting for Klein to continue, he placed the coffee cup on the table and continued. After a long period of experiment and exploration, coupled with the discovery of the slate of desecration, humans had finally perfected the potion system. We formed a series of step-by-step, stable progression paths along the sequence chains. The lower the sequence number, the higher the magic potion rank. To date, each of the 7 churches has at least one complete sequence and a few hundred years of collections of less complete paths. Slate of desecration. Klein had sharply noticed the term. In the meeting, the hanged man had also mentioned it. According to the hanged man, the slate was the most critical factor in the formation and integrity of the contemporary potion system. This was not the same as Dunn's words. It was something created by some evil gods. I am not too clear which era it was created, what was recorded on it, nor what was special about it. If you discover any clues, you must report it immediately. It deserves the highest level of response. Dunn vaguely explained, I have just mentioned one of the types of losing control. Now, I am going to elaborate on the remaining 4. Okay. Klein left the slate of desecration issue behind his mind and listened attentively. Humans have smart minds but no other extraordinary abilities. However, this is not always the case. There are always some lucky people, or rather unfortunate people, who are born with high insight. Well, that is, the ability to sense the spirits. They can listen to the sound that others can't hear, see what others can't see, and have partial extraordinary features. As Dunn spoke, he stared into the emptiness around him, which gave Klein a sense of creepiness. In other words, they are equal to half a sequence 9 extraordinary, with some fixed characteristics. Oh, sequence 9 is in the lowest grade in the chain. In short, these people can only choose the corresponding, fixed sequence pathways. If they take other potions, they may suffer mental disorders, loss of control, or even direct death. I understand. Klein slowly nodded. The third kind of loss of control is similar to the second one. Once you have selected a sequence chain, you can only go down this path, and you can't change your mind. If you take the potion of another suitable path, although there is a high probability that you will get a mixed, unusual and distorted ability, it is almost certain that you will enter a state of semi-madness, becoming either highly sensitive and irritable, cruel and bloodthirsty, or silent and melancholy. And there is only one such opportunity. After that, whether it is taking the original path's potion or the current sequence of potion, the only result will be losing control. It can be mental death, or the body collapses into a monster or an evil spirit. Dunn continued speaking as he took another sip from the coffee cup. Klein was a little scared and was silent for a few seconds. What about the fourth kind of loss of control? The fourth kind, is one of the most common problems. After all, we take the potions and gain the abilities that belong to extraordinary species. This is an unnatural progression. Therefore, we are more or less affected by the residual spiritual powers. Perhaps, the symptoms are not manifested nor detectable, but they are always hidden in our mind. Before one can fully master the extraordinary powers of the potions and eliminate these subtle traces, rushing to take a higher sequence of corresponding potions will accumulate madness and the possibility to lose control. Dunn suddenly stopped. After the pause, he sighed. As per the internal rules of the Night Watchers, even if the team members make a great contribution, they must wait for 3 years and be examined before they can be promoted. Even so, there are many people who lose control every year. It's terrible. Klein took a deep breath. What about the last type? Dunn's mouth was tilted, but he's not smiling. The fifth is also a common cause of loss of control. For an extraordinary, one's insight is more or less improved. The smaller the sequence number, the greater the improvement. Therefore, you can hear the sounds that others can't hear, see the things that others can't see, and encounter the things that others do not encounter. You will be tempted by mysterious lures and illusions. Once you receive other simulations or have your own desires, you will slowly get out of control one step at a time. As he spoke, Dunn turned to face Klein. His gray pupils reflected the image of Klein. His tone became sorrowful. The founder of the modern Night Watcher system, Archbishop Chans, once said, "We are the guardians, but at the same time we are also the miserable people who are fighting against danger and madness." Tn. 1, Pangu, Chinese Creation Myth. Translators, Sfile, Lancent, we are the guardians, but at the same time we are also the miserable people who are constantly fighting against dangers and madness. The corridor outside the window was enclosed by the cold stone walls and the lights in the room shone in a bright yellow color. Dunn Smith's voice echoed faintly in the environment. Every word that he said knocked on Klein's heart. They made him speechless for a short time. Noticing that Klein was at a loss for words, Dunn shook his head and smiled. "Are you disappointed? Extraordinaries are not what you imagined. We are always walking with dangers. Where there is a gain, there is a cost." Klein recovered from the shock and took a moment to formulate his reply. Indeed, he had not realized the potential risks beneath the glorious, uncommon, and outstanding surface of the extraordinaries. However, perhaps it was because he had just heard about them and had yet to encounter them in real life. Or perhaps it was because he was already swept into a vortex of troubles where strange things could happen to him at any time. Therefore, he quickly reduced his fears, upsets, worries and some other emotions to a controllable level. Certainly, the thoughts of giving up were inevitable, which lingered and refused to leave. Not bad. Very mature and sensible, Dunn finished the last sip of coffee, then added, "In addition, extraordinaries are not as powerful as you think." A low-sequence extraordinaries, why do we use 1 to represent the highest rank, while using 9 to represent the lowest? That is contrary to intuition and logic. When we say low sequence, we usually say means low rank, with a high number. It is the starting point of the sequence chain. All right. Where was I? Oh, right, extraordinaries are not as powerful as you think. The power of a low-sequence extraordinaries is no match for guns, not to mention cannons. They are just more magical, and less predictable than firearms. If you ever have a chance to become an extraordinary, please consider what I have said today carefully. Do not rush into any decision. Klein gave a self-deprecating smile. I don't even know when will I have the chance. If there was a chance, he believed that he would not let it go. After all, mistakes such as drinking the wrong potion, or taking a hyperpotent potion of higher rank could be avoided to most extents. The major potential risks were actually the subtle influences that came along with the potion, or the dangers one would hear or see with improved insight. As for the former, he could utilize the experiences from the generations of forerunners. As long as he did not rush into promotions but gain the command of the power steadily, the probability of losing control should be relatively low. Moreover, his main objectives were to resolve the pressing hidden dangers, learn the essence of the occult studies, and find a way to transmigrate back. Those were the reasons why he would want to aim for the high sequence positions. If it was really easy to lose control, he could always give up promotion, stay in the current sequence, and then plan the way home by utilizing his knowledge. The potential risks of the later were even more needless to say. Klein's memory was still fresh from the whispers that he heard during the luck conversion ritual. It had almost driven him crazy with his head exploding. That was not avoidable by not becoming an extraordinary. In any case, it was better to gain some power so that he could combat the risks better. Having evaluated these points, Klein felt that the pros and cons were so clear that the thoughts of withdrawal had almost disappeared. Dunn picked up the pipe again and replied with smiles in his gray eyes. Regarding this matter, I cannot give you a definite answer. To become an extraordinary, first, you need to earn enough credits. Perhaps you can decipher critical ancient documents, or provide useful opinions for our cases just tomorrow or the day after. Secondly, it depends on if there are new arrangements from above. As for that, no one can say for sure. All right, I believe that now you have a better knowledge of extraordinaries. You will not make impulsive choices in the future. Next, I will introduce you to the civilian jobs of our night watcher team. He stood up, paved to the door, pointed the direction opposite the Chan's gate, and continued. We have an accountant and a coachman who is also responsible for purchasing necessary goods and collecting supplies from the church and police department. They are all professionals. They do not need to join the rotation and can rest on weekends. The other 3 civilians are Roseanne, Bright and Old Neil. Their respective jobs are, reception of visitors, cleaning the rooms, writing case files and item declaration lists, watching the library of weapons, materials, and documents, as well as exercising strict entries and registrations for claims. Each of them has 1 day off a week, other than Sundays. They negotiate among themselves on the arrangement of night shifts and rest days. So I will perform the same job as Roseanne and the others. Klein concluded his thought on extraordinaries and tried to clarify his job responsibilities. No, you don't have to. You are a professional. Dunn smiled and said, there are 2 things for you to do at the moment. First, go out for a walk every morning or afternoon. The focus is on the various streets from Welch's residence to your home. What? Klein was dumbfounded. What kind of job is that? What is so professional about that? Dunn put his hands in the pockets of his black windbreaker and said. After we have confirmed that you have really lost your memory, Welch and Naya's case is considered closed. At the same time, the Antigonus family's notebook is completely lost. We suspect that you might have taken it at that time and hidden it on your way home. That's why we couldn't find any clues in your home. That should be the reason why you committed suicide at home instead of at the scene. Although you were influenced by supernatural power and have forgotten this piece of memory, the human spirit and brain are very wonderful. There might be some residual traces that Daly could not obtain with the Soul Whisperer's ability. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. Perhaps, at familiar places, at important places, you may have a feeling of recalling something that you have seen or done. Those are the gains that we want. I understand. Klein suddenly realized. The night watcher's deduction for the notebook's whereabouts was reasonable. Among the people who were present at the scene, I am the only one who is still alive. Thus, only I had the time and motivation to take the notebook and hide it on the way to home. If you can find that notebook, you should be able to earn enough credits to be promoted to an extraordinary. Dunn Smith encouraged him, while indirectly revealed that the notebook was still important. I hope so. Klein nodded. Dunn then changed back the topic. Secondly, you can take a day off every week. For now, you can decide which day. When you are not outside, you can go to the library of weapons to read the documents and records that we keep. This is the job of a history professional. After you have read all of them, you can join the shift rotation. Okay. No problem. Klein secretly felt relieved. It doesn't sound too hard. At this time, Dunn turned his body halfway and pointed to the black iron gate that was engraved with 7 holy emblems. This is Chan's Gate. It was named after the founder of the modern Night Watcher system, Archbishop Chans. There is one of these under every major city's central church. It is guarded by formal members of the Night Watchers on rotation. There are also at least 2 keepers from within the church and countless traps. Do not get close to it in any circumstances. Otherwise, you will be contaminated with misfortune. Sounds scary. Klein expressed his feelings. The area inside is divided into a few sections. We keep potion recipes of certain sequences and different kinds of magical materials. We also use it to temporarily hold heresies, unusual species, cultists and members of secret organizations. Well, they will be eventually sent to the sacred temple. Dunn casually introduced. The Sacred Temple. It is the headquarters of the Church of the Goddess of the Night, located in Winter County to the north of the kingdom. It is also known as the Temple of Serenity. Klein nodded slightly as if he was thinking. Moreover, there are copies of all kinds of classified documents and records. You might get a chance to read them when you have a higher clearance. Dunn hesitated for a while and said, and at the bottom floor behind the Chan's gate, there are some sealed artifacts. Sealed artifacts? Klein pronounced the words carefully. It sounds like a special noun. Among the extraordinary items that we have collected and retrieved, some of them are too important and too magical. If they fall into wrong hands, they can create great damages. That is why we need to keep them strictly secret and watch them carefully. Even we can only use them in certain circumstances. And, Dunn paused at this point and continued, there are some very special existences, which have certain kind of living characteristics. They can lure the guards, influence the surroundings, escape by themselves, and cause catastrophic consequences. They need to be strictly controlled. Very magical, Klein commented. The Night Watcher's headquarters classifies sealed artifacts into 4 grades. Grade 0 represents extremely dangerous. It has the highest importance and highest secret level. They are not allowed to be inquired, or be disseminated, or be described, nor be pried into. They can only be sealed under the Sacred Temple. Dunn described further, Grade 1 is highly dangerous. They can be used in limited ways. The secret level is diocesan bishops, senior night watchers and above. The central churches of diocese headquarters, such as Beckland, can keep 1 or 2 of them. The rest should be turned to the Sacred Temple. Grade 2 is dangerous. They can be used with caution and abstinence. The secret level is bishop and night watchers team captain and above. The central churches in all big cities can keep 3 to 5 of these items. The rest shall be turned into the Sacred Temple or to the diocese headquarters. Grade 3 is somewhat dangerous and needs to be used carefully. They can only be applied for operations with 3 or more participants. The secret level is official members of the Night Watchers. In the future, when you read the corresponding documents, you will understand what it means in the numbers. For example, 2 to 125 is the dangerous grade sealed artifact number 125. While Dunn was speaking, he suddenly turned, walked back to the room, and pulled a piece of paper from the bottom of the drawer. Oh, take a look at this. 3 years ago, a newly appointed archbishop lost control. He somehow managed to break through the multiple layers of protections and mysteriously disappeared with the 0-grade sealed artifact. You can memorize his photo. If you ever see him, do not rattle or disturb him, come back to report it immediately. Otherwise, the chance of you dying at duty is 1000%. What? Klein took that piece of paper. There was no title on it. There were only a black and white photo and a few lines. In Sanguil. Male. 40 years old. Former archbishop. A gatekeeper who failed in his promotion. He was lured by the devil and had fallen into evil. He escaped with sealed artifact 0-08. His detailed characteristics are, in the photo, in Sanguil wore an all-black double-side priest robe and a hat. His hair color was dark blonde, his pupil was deep dark blue, his nose was high, and his lips were clenched. His features looked like those of a classical sculpture with no traces of wrinkles. The most eye-catching feature was a blind eye. The description for the fallen was in full details, while there was only a codename for the sealed artifact. Klein honestly expressed his first impression. This was the highest secret level. The delivery of the search request for seal artifact 0-08 is oral, with no written texts. That is why there are only a few descriptions. Dunn sighed, 0-08 appears to be a common quill, but it can write without ink. That is all. Dunn said no more about the topic. He took out a gorgeous pocket watch along the golden chain on his black windbreaker. Then, he clicked open, took a look, and pointed outside the door. I've told you all you need to know. You can now look for old Neil at the Library of Weapons. Let him arrange for your document readings. He is not a normal civilian clerk, but he used to be a formal member. He is just old, has not been promoted, with bad health, and is in no condition to take care of cases. However, he is unwilling to become an internal keeper or rest at home. All he wants is to be accompanied by documents and records. Okay, Klein whispered. He took the low hat and put it back on his head again. At the same time, he continued to ponder about the characteristics of the sealed artifact 0-08. The appearance of a normal quill. Can write without ink. So what is its real ability? Such that it is highly confidential and considered extremely dangerous. Is it a pen that can write anyone's death? No, that's too powerful. In that case, Insangwil doesn't have to run away. Klein had just turned around and was about to leave the room. Suddenly, Dunn Smith shouted at him. Wait a minute, I've forgotten something. What? Klein turned his head back, he was full of doubts. Dunn put back his gorgeous pocket watch and smiled. Later, go and find the accountant Mrs. Oleana for an advance payment of 4 weeks' salary, which is a total of £12. After that, you can pay back by deducting half of the salary every week until the repayment is completed. That's too much, there is no need for this, you can give a little less, Klein said subconsciously. As for the advance salary, he did not object to it. After all, he did not even have the money to take the public carriage back. However, holding a huge sum of £12 was scary for him. No, this is a necessity. Dunn shook his head and smiled. Think of it this way, are you still willing to continue living in the current apartment, where even the bathroom has to be shared among several households? Perhaps you don't mind, but you have to be considerate for the lady. Additionally, seeing Klein was nodding in approval, Dunn paused, smiled, and studied at the other's clothes carefully. You will also need a walking cane, plus a proper dress. Klein was stunned for a second and immediately realized that his face was red. It was because that the set of cloth that he wore was low standard and cheap. Normally, a top hat that was made of silk was worth 5 to 6 sous. A bow tie was 3 sous, a silver decorated cane was 7 to 8 sous, a shirt was 3 sous, a pair pants, vest, and tuxedo were about £7. Leather boots were 9 to 10 sous. For such a set, it would cost a total of £8 7 sous and above. Of course, a decent gentleman would also need a bracelet, a pocket watch, and a wallet. When the original self and his brother Benson were living thriftily in the past, there was a time when they took a sum of money and went to a proper cloak shop to check on the price. However, it was so expensive that they left the shop without even trying to bargain. In the end, they went to a bargain shop near the Iron Cross Street and bought an economical set each for fewer than £2. It was because of this matter that the original self had an extremely deep impression of the price of proper clothing. Okay, Klein replied in a stuttering voice. Like the original self, he was also a person who cared about appearance. Dunn took out his pocket watch and glanced at it. How about you go to Mrs. Oleana first? I don't know how long you will stay with old Neil. If you wait a little longer, Mrs. Oleana is going home. All right. Klein, who was feeling poor, did not object. Dunn paced back to the table and pulled one of the ropes under the droop. I'll ask Roseanne to take you there. As ropes were being pulled and the gears started turning, Roseanne, who was in the reception hall of the Blackthorn Security Company, heard the soft jingles of the bell hanging from the side. She quickly stood up and carefully stepped down the stairs. It didn't take long for her to appear in front of Klein. Dunn Smith smiled humorously. I hope I have not disturbed your rest. Well, please take Mr. Moretti to Mrs. Oleana. Roseanne quietly pouted her mouth, but she answered happily. Okay, Captain. Just like this. At this time, Klein was surprised and blurted out. Going to the finance to advance the salary, don't you need the captain to write a note and sign? So? Dunn questioned curiously. I mean, in order to request Mrs. Oleana for advance salary, don't you need to sign a note? Klein tried to explain in simple language. Oh, no, it's not required. Roseanne can prove it. Dunn Smith pointed at the brown-haired girl. Captain, we have almost no management for our financial management. Klein resisted the urge to make a sarcastic comment. He followed Roseanne and walked out of the room. Just then, he heard Dunn call again. Wait a minute, there is something else. Can't you finish your instructions at one go? Klein turned back with a smile. Go on. Dunn pressed his temple. When you go to the old Neil, remember to collect 10 demon-hunting bullets. Me? Demon-hunting bullets? Klein was surprised to ask. Welch's revolver is with you, right? You don't have to turn it in. Dunn placed one hand in his pocket. With the demon-hunting bullets, even if you encounter a supernatural danger, you can protect yourself. Oh, at least it can give you courage. You don't have to add the last half of the sentence. As Klein was also worried about this, he agreed without hesitation. Okay, I will remember it. This will require me to write a formal document. Wait a minute. Dunn Smith sat down and picked up the dark red pen. He quickly wrote a note, signed his name, and covered it with a stamp. Thank you, Captain. Klein took it and said sincerely. He slowly stepped back and turned again. Hold on, Dunn shouted again. Captain, you seem to be only in your 30s, how come you are behaving as if you aging in advance? Klein forced a smile and turned back. What else? I've forgotten, you haven't practiced shooting before. Therefore, it's useless to hold the demon-hunting bullet. How about this, you will receive 30 normal bullets every day. When you are out, go to Zutland Street. There is an underground shooting range which is mainly used by the police department, but there is an area dedicated to the night watchers too. Ah, yes, you will need to get a badge from the old Neil, or else you can't enter the shooting range. Dunn patted on his forehead and took back the note from Klein. He added the other contents and also impressed a stamp. All good gunmen are fed with bullets. Don't underestimate the practice. Dunn handed the modified note back to Klein. I understand. Klein, who was afraid of the possible dangers, couldn't wait to go today. He walked 2 steps, suddenly turned his body halfway, and asked cautiously. Captain, is there anything else? Nothing. Dunn nodded firmly. Klein breathed a sigh of relief and walked outside the door. During which, he had a strong urge to turn around and ask, are you sure you have nothing else? He resisted this impulse and finally left the keeper room successfully. The captain has always been like this. He is always forgetting things. Roseanne walked beside him and complained in a low voice. Even my grandmother has a better memory. Of course, he will only forget small things, little things. Klein. I will call Klein from now on. Mrs. Oleana is a kind-hearted person and she is very easy to get along with. In addition, her father is a watchmaker and his craft is very good. While listening to the brown-haired girl's ramble, Klein stepped on the stairs and returned to the upper level. He met Mrs. Oleana in the office on the right-hand side. She was a dark-haired lady wearing a lotus leaves pattern dress. She looked like she was in her 30s. She had a stylish curly hair, a pair of green pupils which were clear and smiling. She looked scholarly and elegant. After listening to Roseanne repeating Dunn Smith's arrangement, Oleana took out a note and wrote an advance slip. Please sign here. Do you have a seal? If not, you can leave a fingerprint instead. Okay. Klein completed the formalities. Oleana took out a bronze key and opened the safe in the room. She counted the pound notes, smiled, and said. You are so lucky, there is enough cash today. By the way, Klein, are you invited by the captain because you were involved in evil events and have your own specialties? Yes, madam. Your instincts are accurate. Klein praised in a direct manner. Oleana took out 4 light gray backgrounds, dark black-colored banknotes. She relocked the safe, turned around and laughed. It was the same for me. Is it? Klein appropriately expressed surprise. Have you heard about the serial killer that shocked the entire Tengen 16 years back? Oleana handed 4 notes to Klein. Oh yes, I remember. He was the bloody butcher who killed 5 girls. He took the hearts from some girls and the stomachs of the others. When I was a child, my mother often used this incident to scare my sister. Klein tried to recall the incident and replied. He received the banknote and realized that it was 2 5-pound notes and 2 1-pound notes, both of which were gray and black, with complex patterns and special watermarks on the 4 corners. The former was slightly larger. The center of the note was the 5th king of the Kingdom of Ruin. He was Henry Augustus I, the direct ancestor of George III. He had a white hair band, a round face, narrow eyes, and very serious expression. However, he had an incomprehensible closeness in Klein's eyes. This is a 5-pound note. It is equal to nearly 4 weeks of Benson's salary. The center of the 1-pound note was the father of George III, the former King William Augustus VI. The strong leader had a thick beard and a determined look. During his reign, the Kingdom of Ruin dispelled its past shackles and once again rose to the top of the nations. These are all good kings. Klein vaguely smelt the heartwarming ink scent of the banknotes. Yes. If it wasn't for the night watchers who had rushed to the scene, would have become the 6th victim. Mrs. Oleana still had a hint of fear in her tone, even though it had been more than a decade. Sounds that serial killer, no, the butcher, was an extraordinary. Klein carefully folded the banknotes, placed them in the pockets on the inside of the suit, and then touched the vicinity of his cloth several times to confirm. Yes. Mrs. Oleana was nodding with an intense expression. There were many people who had been killed by him before. The reason why he was caught was that he was preparing for a demon ritual. No wonder he needed the different internal organs. Sorry, ma'am, I made you recall such a horrible experience. Klein apologized sincerely. Oleana smiled. I am no longer afraid now. At that time, I was still studying accounting at a business school. After that, I came here. Okay, I shouldn't delay you, you have to go see old Neil. Goodbye, ma'am. Klein took off his hat and left the office. Before walking down the stairs, he couldn't help but touch the inside pocket to confirm that the 12-pound banknotes were still there. He turned at the crossroad and headed to the right. Not long after, he saw a half-covered iron gate. Done. 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 Amidst the sound of knocking on the door, there was an old voice. Come in. Klein pushed the iron door and found it to be a narrow room. It could only accommodate 1 table and 2 chairs. On the other side of the room, there was a tightly locked iron door. Behind the table, there was an old man with white hair and a classic black robe. He was reading a few pages of pale yellowish paper under the light of the gas lamp. He looked up and glanced towards the door. Are you Klein Moretti? Roseanne mentioned just now that you are a very polite gentleman. Miss Roseanne is really a friendly person. Good afternoon, Mr. Neil. Klein took off his hat. Please sit. Neil pointed to the silver tin can with complex flowery patterns. Would you like a cup of freshly ground coffee? The wrinkles around his eyes and mouth were deep. He also had a pair of dark red pupils which were slightly cloudy. You don't seem to drink coffee. Klein keenly observed that Neil's ceramic cup contained clear water. This is my habit. I don't drink coffee after 3 p.m. Neil smiled and explained. Why? Klein asked casually. Neil smiled and looked into Klein's eyes. I am afraid that if I have a bad sleep at night, I will hear some inexplicable whispers. Klein didn't know how to respond. Instead, he tried to ask. Mr. Neal, what documents and books should I start with? As he spoke, he took out the note written by Dunn Smith. Things related to history are complicated and piecemeal. To be honest, I have always been trying to learn, but I can only master the basics. The other things are too troublesome, such as people's diaries, popular books, epitaphs, etc. Wait, Neal lamented. For example, the ones I have at hand need more detailed historical records to infer the specific contents. Why? Klein was a little confused. Neal pointed to a few pieces of pale yellowish paper in front of him. This is the diary that Russell Gustav had lost before his death. For confidentiality, he had recorded it in the strange symbols that he had invented. Russell the Great? The Transmigration Senior? Klein paused and immediately listened attentively. Many people believe that he had not really died but instead became a hidden god. Thus, there have been cults holding various rituals to worship him, trying to gain some kinds of powers. We would occasionally encounter such things and obtained a few pieces of original or copied notes. Neal shook his head. Till today, no one can interpret the true meaning of those special symbols. Therefore, the Sacred Cathedral has allowed us to keep a copy for studying, hoping to arrive at some unexpected surprises. Having said that, Neal showed a smug smile. I have actually interpreted a few of these symbols. I can confirm that they are numeric symbols. Look at my discovery, this is actually a diary. Well, I am hoping to use the historical events of the different dates, especially the events regarding the emperor. Comparing these to the records on the day of the diary, I can try to interpret more symbols. The mind of a genius, right? The old gentleman with white hair and deep wrinkles looked brightly at Klein. Klein nodded to agree. Yes. You can also take a look at it. You will have to start helping me with the documents tomorrow. Mr. Neal pushed the yellowish pages towards Klein. Klein turned the pages around, took a glance at it, and was immediately stunned on the spot. Although those symbols were copied in an ugly fashion and were slightly distorted, he would never mistake them. This is the text that I am familiar with. Chinese. In addition, it is simplified Chinese. TN, updated, Sacred Temple, to Sacred Cathedral, updated, Temple of Serenity, to Cathedral of Serenity.